Morning, everyone joining us for our webinar this morning. We're going to give it a couple of minutes to let people all come in. We've got quite a few sign-ups today, so really excited about having super interesting discussions this morning. We've got some great panelists today. If anyone wants to say hello in the chat function, delegates and panelists, please say hello. If you want to share contact details, more than happy for you to do that as well. We've got some familiar names coming through, so appreciate everyone following our events throughout the year and coming through today as well. So I'd normally wait a little bit longer, but because we've got such an amazing panel, we've got so much to talk about, I'm going to start now with a couple of minutes past the hour. So welcome everyone to our Climate Change Summit webinar. We're actually running two webinars today. This morning is dedicated entirely to members of staff at the NHS. If you don't know anything about sustainability partnerships, we relaunched this year after 7 years of running under the name Sustainability Day of Action. If you don't know anything about us, please go to sustainabilitypartnerships.co.uk. I'd normally give a bit more of an intro to us, but like I said, because we have such a great packed out panel with really pertinent points about climate change, I'm going to probably give straight over to our panelists. So to give you an idea of what we've got coming up, we've got Dr. Lucy Brooks. She's going to be discussing volatile anesthetic gases. We've got Heidi Bernard. She's going to be discussing decarbonisation. And then we have Dr. Minu Netke, who's going to be, again, speaking about those anesthetic gases and also about waste management. So what we're going to do is we're going to have each of our panelists do a talk one after another about the things that they're dealing with, challenges, and then we're also going to have a Q&A session at the end. So like I said, everyone, please feel free to have a chat in that chat function. All delegates more than happy for you guys to be having your own discussions with each other, throwing in your own personal experiences, your insights, and also we'll run that question and answer session at the end of the event, and we really hope that we'll get some great questions, points, and discussion from the panelists and the delegates today. So Lucy, I'm going to pass straight on to you. If you want to give a bit of an introduction to who you are, what you do, and then please go straight into your presentation. I'll go on mute and pass it over to you.
Great, thanks Georgia. Hi everyone, it's nice to meet you. I'm Lucy Brooks. I'm an anaesthetic registrar by background, but I'm currently out of programme doing a leadership fellowship in climate change and anaesthesia for Health Education England, Yorkshire and Humber. So I'm just going to share my presentation with you now. So great, so I'm hoping everyone can see that and that Georgia will wave at me if you can't. Cool, so as I said, that's who I am. Now I know not everybody here is an anaesthetist, but we know that there are loads of sustainability challenges in anaesthesia, and it's something that contributes very greatly to the NHS carbon footprint. So I'm going to chat to you quite broadly about some of the sustainability challenges in anaesthesia, and I know Dr. Netke is going to cover some of those again later. I'm going to focus in particular on anaesthetic gases, and I'll explain why, and then mention a few things that anaesthetists can do to change things, and then I think later on we're going to hear a bit more about that in practice. So some of you might recognize this chart here on the right, the pie chart. The pie chart is the breakdown of the NHS carbon footprint. And what I've done is I've added arrows into some of the areas where I think there are sustainability challenges, specifically in anaesthesia. Obviously, you can think about your own areas of practice and how they fit in here. The most obvious one, of course, is anaesthetic gases and metered dose inhalers, which you can see makes up 5% of the NHS carbon footprint. But what's important to think about here is that that is the whole NHS, including primary care and mental health trusts. And not every area of the NHS actually uses anaesthetic gases. They don't provide anaesthesia or analgesia, pain relief in labour, for example. So actually, if we think about an acute NHS organisation where anaesthetic gases are in routine use, they account for about 5% of that organisation's carbon footprint. So it's quite a big deal, given that it's something that anaesthetists are very intricately involved with and have a lot of scope to make changes. Other things that anaesthetists use a lot of are intravenous drugs, and obviously you can see that the medicines coming out on the supply chain side of this pie chart on the right, but we use IV drugs every day, and anaesthetists need to be very careful to make sure they're disposing of those drugs correctly and not wasting drugs where at all possible. We also use absolutely loads of single-use equipment, often made of plastic. And again, that there's a huge carbon footprint associated with that, both in terms of the raw materials and making the plastics, but also in the transport, because some of these things come from all over the world. And there are choices that anaesthetists can make to reduce the carbon footprint of the equipment they use. For example, choosing reusable wherever possible. Things like surgical gowns for sterile procedures can be reusable, and other equipment that is single patient use can stay with the patient when they move around the hospital, rather than being thrown away every time they enter the anaesthetic room or back into the recovery room after their operation. Some things are single use, as in only one use, but some things are single patient use, so they can stay with the patient for a bit longer. Theatres and anaesthesia create a huge amount of waste. We know that the NHS produces something in the region of 400,000 tonnes per year of waste, and that's about, works out about 4% of all UK solid waste, and about a third of that is clinical waste from the NHS. So we know that about 10% of NHS waste is recycled, and I'm not going to talk too much about this because again, it might be something that's covered later. But from an anaesthetic point of view, we think that probably about 40% of anaesthetic waste could be recycled, whilst a lot of that isn't currently. So there's definitely plenty to be getting on with there. Theatres and anaesthesia are also the highest energy users in the hospital. A lot of anaesthetic equipment, things like anaesthetic machines, are not particularly energy intensive, but there are a few things that we use that are. For example, we use, you might have heard of bear huggers, they're patient convective warming devices, and they're very high energy. Also things like radiative heating devices, or overhead hot lamps, use a huge amount of energy. But also one of the things that we really can't be without is anaesthetic gas scavenging systems. They're very, very high energy usage comparative to other electronic equipment and devices that we use in theatres, and they often sit on out of hours even when they're not in use. So one thing that anaesthetists can do to reduce their carbon footprint and the overall negative impacts on the environment is to switch things like the scavenging off out of hours. We also have a big role to play in perioperative care pathways. Creating lean pathways is a way to reduce the carbon footprint of the whole NHS, and anaesthetists can be intricately involved in the design of some of the pathways of how patients travel through the hospital and through their journey perioperatively. If we can reduce the number of admissions that patients, or the number of times patients have to come into the hospital, we can reduce their travel miles, and you can see here that patient travel accounts for 5% of the NHS carbon footprint. Lastly, we need to think about our own travel footprint. So commuting, staff commute is 4% of the NHS carbon footprint. And we know that, we could be looking at doing more active transport. There has been trusts where they've looked at how far people live from the hospital, the staff, and often people are within 5 miles of the hospital. So trusts need to be working to look at how they can implement things like active transport, cycling. So do they have enough lockers, do they have enough showers and secure bike storage? So it's not just individual anaesthetists that have a role to play in reducing these things. But as I said, I'm going to take a deep dive into anaesthetic gases. Now, I'm hoping this won't be too dry for those of you who aren't anaesthetists. These gases here on the left of this table, sevoflurane, isoflurane and desflurane, are the gases that we use to anaesthetise patients for operations. Nitrous oxide at the bottom is a gas that we use to provide pain relief and for a few other reasons in anaesthesia, but the majority of nitrous oxide use is actually by non-anaesthetists outside of theatre, particularly on the labour ward in obstetrics for pain relief in labour. Anaesthetic gases are greenhouse gases, and differences in their chemical structure account for their difference in their lifetime. You can see here the second column in the atmospheric lifetime of the gas, and it is the different length of lifetime that is primarily responsible for the differences in their global warming potential, i.e. how much they warm the earth by in terms of their greenhouse gas effect. So you can see here that sevoflurane has an atmospheric lifetime of only 1.1 years, and its global warming potential over 100 years is 130, whereas compare that to desflurane, it's got a much longer lifetime of 14 years, and its global warming potential is 2,540. So the differences are quite huge here, as you can see. And in fact, when we compare the gases per unit mass, that's what was done here, you can see the difference. But we also need to bear in mind that desflurane is less potent than sevoflurane. And what that means is that for the same clinical effect, you need to use approximately 3 times as much desflurane as you would sevoflurane. And the reason why that's relevant is because it means for the same clinical benefit, i.e. keeping your patient asleep during the operation or anaesthetised during the operation, the global warming and the carbon footprint impact of desflurane is about 60 times greater than that of sevoflurane. So that's pretty significant, really. So I guess the question is, well, why are we still using desflurane then? Well, there's a few reasons. The reasons that were given when it was first introduced, and the reason it's often still quoted by those that are still using it. And bear in mind, lots of anaesthetists are no longer using it because of these carbon footprint reasons, but that there is some evidence that statistically patients will wake up faster using desflurane than they will sevoflurane. And that is statistically significant in the studies that have been done. However, I question whether or not it's really clinically significant. There's a meta-analysis of 1,500 patients, and they compared desflurane to sevoflurane and time to extubation, so removing the breathing tube after the operation. And they found that the difference, it was 1.3 minutes faster using desflurane than sevoflurane. And I would question whether 1.3 minutes is really the difference between getting additional case on that list in the day, or finishing on time, or whatever it is that your reason why you need them to wake up quicker. It's rare that 1.3 minutes is going to be the difference. So that's something to just bear in mind. And as I say, this is quite dry if you're not an anaesthetist, but I'll draw your attention to this final column on the right hand side. And this is showing you the equivalent mileage driven in an average petrol car for an hour of anesthesia with these different gases. And so you can see that if you have a very long case, for example, if you're being operated on all day, the anesthetic gas choices can make a very big difference. If you had a 10-hour complicated surgery, you might find yourself having a huge carbon footprint, the 400 miles per hour, that's getting from, I live in Leeds, and that's Leeds to London and back. And that's just per hour. So if you think about the whole day, when we take into account the way that we live, and as anaesthetists, a lot of anaesthetists are quite a health and eco-conscious bunch. Lots of people cycle to work, people have their reusable coffee cups, and all those things are really important. But then if you do one long case all day, you could use up your entire year's worth of carbon footprint just by using desflurane over sevoflurane. So that's a bit of a lecture about what we call the volatile anaesthetics that we use to keep people asleep. But as I said, nitrous oxide is also an anaesthetic gas. You can see on this bar chart on the right, the carbon footprint of nitrous oxide overshadows the other volatile anaesthetics. And in part, that's to do with the sheer volumes that we use. And as I say, the majority of that is actually outside of theatres and anaesthesia. So in obstetrics and emergency departments, endoscopy, things like that, where it's used to provide pain relief during procedures usually. But one of the things that's also important to note about nitrous oxide is, as well as having global warming potential, i.e. as well as being able to warm the earth up and increase the temperature that we're living in, it also has ozone depleting potential as well. So not only is it heating the world, it's also destroying the ozone, which the other volatile anaesthetics do to a much lesser degree. They don't really have much ozone depleting potential, although, as I showed, they do have quite significant global warming potential. One of the things that's really interesting about nitrous is that it's believed now that we have huge amounts of wastage in many hospitals. A project that was started at Lothian in Scotland called the Nitrous Oxide Project identified that there was a huge amount of leakage and wastage of nitrous oxide coming from the manifold, the storage of cylinders which supply the pipeline, and also from within the pipes themselves. They actually found that they've spread this study out across multiple different trusts now. And in some places, we're wasting up to 95% of the nitrous oxide before it ever reaches a patient. And that's across the whole hospital, not just in theatres and anaesthesia. And that's primarily, as I say, from leaky pipes and manifolds, but also to do with the manifold management. So, for example, if a cylinder is changed on the manifold before it's actually empty, that cylinder goes back to the company that supplied it, and they're not able to recapture and recycle anything that's left in the canister. They have to just vent it to the atmosphere regardless. So once you've opened a nitrous cylinder, you're committing to all of that nitrous ending up in the atmosphere one way or the other. There's also been a few cases of theft. Nitrous oxide is laughing gas. It has a street value. And so manifold security is also really, really important. But we're not just talking about carbon footprint here. Think about how much money we're wasting as well by using nitrous oxide, by losing nitrous oxide from the pipes. So people need to be thinking about that and looking into what they can do about it. We also, in theatres, we use scavenging. We collect the gases that are breathed out by the patient and vent those to the atmosphere. So they go through the scavenging system I mentioned earlier. But in some other situations, for example, in obstetric departments, they don't always have scavenging, which means that the nitrous is breathed out, it just goes back into the room that everybody's standing in. And there is some risk to staff in terms of staff exposure to nitrous oxide. But it's not all doom and gloom. There is some new technology on the horizon that is just about to come to market, I believe, in the UK for nitrous oxide destruction. There's a company called Medclaire who created some tech that scavenges the nitrous oxide and breaks it down into both nitrogen and oxygen, which can then be safely released, both in terms of staff safety and exposure, but also from an environmental point of view as well. Obviously, oxygen and nitrogen making up the majority of our atmosphere already. So that is a real whistle-stop tour of some of the challenges that we're facing and a bit of a deep dive into what the problems are with volatiles and nitrous. But what can we do about it? There's lots of things we can do about it. So anaesthetists can try to avoid using the volatile anaesthetics whenever possible. So that might be using regional anaesthesia, for example, a spinal anaesthetic for some operations is possible. Or if a general anaesthetic is required, they can maintain anaesthesia using IV drugs for the entire surgery without requiring inhaled gases, and that's called TIVA, total intravenous anaesthesia. That's not completely without problems, but we know it's got a significantly lower carbon footprint, sort of in the 4 orders smaller carbon footprint than volatile anaesthetics, particularly than desflurane and nitrous oxide. When you are going to do an inhalational anaesthetic or maintain anaesthesia with volatiles, avoiding using desflurane and avoiding using nitrous oxide because of the harms that I've discussed earlier, and avoiding wasting any of the volatiles when you're using them. And there are a few different techniques that anaesthetists can use to reduce their waste, but I won't go into all of that now. I don't think it's particularly useful if you're not an anaesthetist. The other thing is to investigate your nitrous oxide wastage and sign up to the nitrous oxide project. And that really involves some multidisciplinary working, because we also need to know what's being wasted in other departments. So working with colleagues in other specialties, particularly obstetrics, to look at how we can reduce our nitrous oxide use is a really important next step. So that's all I wanted to say to you. I will hand back to Georgia, and I'd be very happy to take any questions in the chat or later on when we've got some Q&A time.
Awesome, amazing. Thanks, Lucy. I knew it was going to be a really interesting one. I told you not to shy away from the science, and you didn't. And I really appreciate it, because it's so interesting for people like me who don't know that much about it. I really also appreciate that you're really looking at the bigger picture as an anaesthetist. You're not just saying, oh, this is what we do. You're looking at the entire picture, from everything from supply chain to commuting, and honestly, it was definitely not too dry. It was really, really juicy stats, Lucy, and I know that's what I'm here for. I don't know about everyone else. And we've got people chatting, we've got people asking questions. You've already lit a fire with Heidi, who's going to be on next with her hashtag ditch the desk. So I don't know if that's like a well-known hashtag, Heidi, if that's something that you're trying to get trending, but yeah, I really appreciate the enthusiasm, the energy already that we've had from you, Lucy, and everyone getting involved. There are some questions here, but I'm going to save them until the end, but please do keep asking questions, adding your thoughts and experiences in the chats, and I'm going to hand straight over to you now, Heidi, if that's okay.
It is indeed. So for those who have been looking at the chat, there's 2 very famous campaigns, if you're on Twitter or any social media, for Ditch the Des and Nix the Nox, and you'll find all sorts of resources available if you want to find out more, if you look at those 2 hashtags. So without further ado, I will share my presentation. Can you give me a thumbs up, Georgia, if we can see it? Excellent. So I'm going to take a slightly different tact in talking about decarbonisation, and not focus on anaesthetic gases, but I'm going to be focusing on energy usage, and you'll see why as I go through this. So my name's Heidi Barnard. I'm Group Head of Sustainability for the Northern Care Alliance NHS Foundation Trust, which most of you will probably have never heard of. So we are a relatively new entity. We only formally became a foundation trust on the 1st of October this year, so very, very new, but have been working as a group together since 2016. And it's the bringing together of Salford Royal Foundation Trust and the Pennine Acute Trust, so the north part of Greater Manchester. So we have around 20,000 staff and provide a huge range of community and hospital services, and service over 1 million people across Bury, Oldham, Rochdale and Salford, and for some surgeries and treatments, the wider Greater Manchester area. So one of the things I wanted to take you through so far was our sustainability story so far. So again, as a fairly new and young organisation, we haven't actually been at this very long. And it kind of started when I joined. There was a few things happening around. We'd done some work with our travel and transport team and got EV charging on site through Transport for Greater Manchester. And the anaesthetics guys, particularly Dr. Ollie Pratt at Salford, had been on a one-man mission on DES for some time. But I started in August 2019, and at that point we signed up to various things, including the declaration of a climate emergency, which we did through the Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership. We signed up to the NHS Plastics Pledge, so that was a busy first month. And then for the next couple of months, I was new to the NHS. I'd come from the private sector, so I was trying to get my head around what was this beast of an organisation I joined, what on earth were its impacts, and how on earth are we going to try and tackle them? And one of the first things I quickly realised is this is not a one-woman show. There ain't no way I could do this on my own. So I began to build a team around me. So I appointed an energy manager, a waste manager, and repurposed somebody who had been shoved in car parking to be our air quality and travel and transport guru. So that was all within the first sort of 6 to 9 months. And then the year of COVID, which actually hasn't slowed us down at all, but has allowed us to get on with a lot of the things that we wanted to do, but at much more of a pace because we've had the capacity to do it. So the Greener NHS campaign was launched by Sir Simon Stevens back in January 2020, and handily I went to the board the following week with our brand new SDMP, which made getting it signed off as the easiest thing in the world, and they were all raring for more. So that could not have been timed better for me. So we were busily working away through the first phase of our SDMP during the lockdown 1 and 2. We managed to get switched over to a green electricity tariff. We've had various trials of stuff going on, but one of the biggest impacts, which I'm not going to labour on too much today, has been around waste. When I joined the organisation, I was pretty horrified with the state of what was happening with waste, what we did with it, how it was managed, and we kicked off a waste revolution. We are completely radically overhauling how we manage waste across the organisation. It is not a short programme. We started sort of May time this year, and that is going to be still running for another 18 months to embed all of the changes we need to make and the systemic changes we need to make to how we manage waste. In the background, we've also been working on the new green plan. So after the Delivering a Net Zero NHS report was published, we needed to realign what was our previous SDMP into our new plan and realign what we were trying to achieve. That went to board in September, and I can happily say was signed off very quickly and very easily. So there is one thing I want people to remember about a green plan, and if you get a police song in your mind, that is intentional. So there's, for me, the success of our green plan over the next 3 years, which is what it covers, is if we can embed that strap line so that every decision we take and every choice we make contributes to delivering net zero carbon for our organisation, the green plan will have done its job. Obviously, there's lots of detail in the plan about what we're going to be doing, but fundamentally, we need everybody in our organisation to have this at the forefront of their mind when they're making choices and making decisions, that carbon has to be a part of that choice. So obviously, as any green plan does, it's got all the usual bump in the front of it, but the two key takeaways for you guys I want to think about today are these two. The climate crisis is a health crisis, and that's why it is intrinsic to everything we do as a healthcare organisation. And the second part is we've got 6 years to deal with our direct emissions. And the reason for that is our target is net zero by 2040 for our direct emissions. But the ambition is to get 80% of that done between 2028 and 2032. That is 6 years away. So we have 6 years to get our, excuse my language, shit together. So that is the key takeaways I want people to think about. And I think it's important that people have that almost that burning bridge in their minds that we have to deal with this and we have to deal with it now. Because when you start to bandy around dates like 2040, people think it's too far away, and they don't feel the immediacy of it. So that's again one of the key takeaways I'm trying to embed in people's mind is this isn't some ethereal thing in the future. This is here and now. The other thing that I was trying to get people to grapple with as we go through this is the whole materiality thing around the impacts that we have and the ability to influence. And the things I'm going to be talking today are very much in this back end here around the stuff we have the ability to influence, those things we've got to get on top of in the next 6 years. And everybody's favourite diagram, which I'm sure is going to appear in every presentation today, around the carbon impact of the NHS and where the impacts are. So when we talk about direct emissions, we're talking about this green section over here. Now, we've already heard about anaesthetic gases. I'm going to be concentrating on building energy, but there is all of this stuff over here. And this particular one here, other supply chain. So the first thing I thought when I saw that, well, what on earth is that? So we commissioned within our organisation some further studies. So we have a carbon analysis that we are kind of in the second stage of going through. And again, what comes out on top is other medical and surgical equipment purchases. But having done the detail ourselves, I can then dig into that. And a lot of that is one-off purchases. So it's big construction works. So things like building of theatres, adding on wards. We have some breathe energy projects that are going on. For 2020 to 2021 year, there was one notable exception to that, and that was masks and its associated equipment. So all of the dispensers and all of the other stuff that went alongside dispensing masks. So we spent 1.3 million on all that stuff, and it accounted for 10% of our carbon footprint in that year, which scared me no end because I know how much of stuff came from the free push stock that wasn't included in that number. And I also know that it didn't account for all the wastage and all the increases in waste that we had. So that's a bit of my rant about masks, which we'll leave alone for now. So the bit I want to concentrate on today is this bit. So the direct emissions from gas and electric. People think, well, electric, we've sorted that, you just switch to a green tariff. That's only part of the story. The other issue is gas and steam and all of the other stuff we use to heat our hospitals. And they're trying to put it in a picture for you. So gas equates for about 8,000 tons. The electric equates for about 8,000 tons of our carbon footprint. Gas, 34,000 tons. We've gone to a greener tariff, so that will cut the electricity considerably, but not to zero until we start investing in on-site renewables. The gas, and it also accounts for the steam in here, is the bit that we're going to struggle with. And it's how do we get that and how do we do something different to heat our hospitals? And again, taking it back to that bigger picture. So 10% of building energy from an NHS point of view comes from building energy. But for us, it's actually bigger. It's 14.5% of our footprint. And you think, well, how hard can it be to sort of kind of bring those numbers down? And again, I came from manufacturing and construction background. I was used to manufacturing plant that had data logging and telematics all over it. So I knew exactly what the plant was doing at all times of the day and night. So my expectation when I sort of kind of came into the organisation that we'd have metering numbers, I'd know what wards were using what energy, I'd know where it was all going. How wrong could you be? So this is sort of the reality of what we have to deal with. We still have people doing manual meter reads. We still have inaccuracies in those meter reads. We still don't have that much metering. We have got very old and antiquated systems. So how do you begin to understand where you're using that energy to be able to tackle which bits of it you actually need, which bits are redundant, and therefore which bits can you reduce, and what is your when you're speccing new technology and new equipment, what is the actual need, and how do you fulfill that need in the most decarbonised way? The other thing is, if I take you through a bit of a journey, so these are pictures of Salford Royal through the years. So this was taken in 1900. That building, most of that building's still there. This was it in the 1970s, and you can see in the bottom hand that's the original building still there. This was around 2012 when the new phase, so the Mayo building went up. We had the new Hope building, and then you can see in the background here Ladywell and Barnes building. And we are still evolving. So this is the artist impression of the James Potter building, which is going up as we speak. So the reality is we have a site which has got over 100 years of history, with 100 years worth of piping and equipment in it, some of which may still work, some of which will still be redundant, and some of which may or may not still be there, but we've got to strip out if we want to put new stuff in. And we've got various phases of equipment. So we'll have some technology from the 1900s, some from the 70s, and every year in between. Which leads me on to, so how do we map how on earth we do this? So we've, as I said, we've had legacy systems. We've also got legacy funding outcomes. So sustainability is not a new thing. There's been energy projects and CHPs and various other stuff been going on for the last 15, 20 years. And we have a number of them across some of our sites. And some of the old funding mechanisms are still being paid back. So some of the, particularly at Salford, we've got another 15 years on some of those contracts. So how do I weave in the new things we need to do to decarbonise it, but not put at risk the funding mechanisms we've had for old systems and put ourselves in a more difficult financial situation? Redundancy, we know we've got redundant systems across the sites, and particularly I'm thinking here at Oldham, we have steam generated from an on-site incinerator, which is not ours. It's a third party's. We know that has got a limited life left in it. But we also know that that steam is going to places that don't really need it. And it's trying to understand, well, actually, going forward, we've got various master plans around what the site's going to look like in 5 to 10 years' time. How do we plan the heating and energy needs of the future without relying on the past? And again, that new services, we've got buildings going up left, right, and centre, and every other day I seem to hear about a new idea and a new scheme for a new bit somewhere else. So how do we make sure all of that is encompassed in our existing infrastructure where we can, and we only start putting spades in the ground when we actually have to? And we've all heard about new technologies and a big push to electrify a lot of the heating within the NHS. That scares me somewhat, because I know at each of our sites we're at the electrical capacity. So even if we installed it, we wouldn't be able to power it. So how do we increase electrical capacity at site to be able to do this, but also many of the other things in our green plan, like transport? We want to electrify our fleet. We've got over 150 vehicles. How do I get them onto a grid system when I know I've not got any more electric? So we're looking at solar technologies over car parks to generate it, but it's not going to be enough. The other constraint we have is, again, if you think back to the age of some of our buildings and the state of them, if I want to put solar on the roof, I've got to fix the roof first. So all of this is additional costs and more capital outlay when we don't have that much cash. And when the schemes come up, we know that we've got to be able to justify the cost of the scheme in terms of the payback. To these on to the last one, investment cycles and PSDS rounds. We need to be able to be in a position where we know what our roadmap for investment looks like. So we know we need technology A in year 1, item 2 in year 2, etc., so that and have business cases ready to go, so that when the funding rounds come up, we are in a good place to be able to put applications in and know that they're going to get awarded. Because the other part of this is all of those schemes, particularly PSDS, has been massively oversubscribed every time they run around. So not everybody gets the funding. So if you don't get the funding, how do we decarbonise without that funding? So I appreciate I was quite quick in my talk there, and I do talk at a million miles an hour. Happy to take any comments or questions or leave them till the end.
Thanks so much, Heidi. And I appreciate that the people that we have speaking, and it has been throughout the year as well, as people who don't just say, okay, I'm just going to look after this one little bit, Heidi's just looking after facilities management. No, it's the whole piece, it's the whole picture. And the people who are really pushing the boundaries, like everyone on the panel today, are people who are just like, no, we have to work together. It's not just one person's responsibility to look after that tiny little segment of it. We need to make sure that it's holistic. So I really appreciate it. And I think as well, like all like other facilities managers, energy managers, people that we've spoken to before, just, you know, they're just as sort of passionate, as conscientious as you are. And I think that, you know, you guys are really the ones pushing for change, and I really appreciate everything that you're doing. Is probably more than what I want to say from that one, Heidi. I'm going to pass over to Minu, and for our last talk. There are some questions, there are some comments. Everyone's really loving all of the talk so far, so we'll carry that on through to your one, Minu, if I can pass over to you now.
Thank you, Georgia. So I am Dr. Meena Netke, and I'm one of the consultant anaesthetists at Royal Wolverhampton Hospital, and I'm also clinician lead for sustainability. I'm going to share my presentation and we'll start from there. Can you see? Excellent. So I'm going to talk about roadmap of my trust, the Royal Wolverhampton Hospital, towards sustainability and what challenges or opportunities developed on the way. So we are quite a big trust, 900-bedded hospital, and we work split site at Cannock Chase and New Cross site. Sustainability was actually embedded in our culture right from 2009 because we had this carbon management plan. We overperformed actually from what Greener and NHS expected of us. By about 2015, we had 15% reduction in carbon emission. And when Department of Health expected sustainability to be incorporated in annual reports, we already had the sustainability development and management plan in place. In 2019, which is a benchmark year from where we target to reduce our carbon emissions, was a slight blip in terms of increase in our carbon footprint because we expanded, we had bigger catchment area, and we also increased our activity. I think we are probably quite unique in terms of the sustainability leads that we have. We have a non-clinical head of sustainability and myself as clinician lead for sustainability for the trust. We accepted the green plan early this year, and it's now embedded in our sustainability program. So what is our green plan? It is well in line with NHSE delivering net zero NHS by 2045. Our plan is ambitious enough to again fall in line with that. We plan to reduce in next 3 years our carbon emission by about 25%, and we want to go net zero at least with the direct emissions by 2032. And our green plan gives us a good framework and targets for every year and action plans so that we can comply with it. Lucy has already elucidated a lot about inhalational anesthetic. Being an anesthetist, I can't continue with my talk without an anesthetic slide, and I'm going to talk about desflurane because it is such an important greenhouse gas and has got a huge global warming potential, and going to give our story about it. So about 2/3 of the department was using desflurane when we did a survey as a default anesthetic or for morbidly obese patients and for prolonged surgery. And the data that we collected around it, I think if someone wants to start this, is using the pharmacy data and the model hospital tool. The model hospital tool told us we were not outliers. We were using about 13% as compared to the total anesthetic use using desflurane. So what we did was some behavioral changes. We presented our data in our anesthetic meetings and decided to withdraw all our vaporizers and cartridges from the anesthetic machines. And it did have significant impact for the 4 weeks to follow. From 13%, the desflurane use fell down to about 0.8%. But as we are tracking the data, we are seeing a gradual increase in desflurane use back up again. That means old habits die hard, and so people are going back to their old habits. And we've decided, here's where the leadership comes. We've decided at the divisional level that we are going to completely stop procuring desflurane. And we are conscious of the fact that we have to put in resources to give anesthetics with total intravenous anesthesia, so we'll need pumps. We probably will increase sevoflurane use, but again, it's not as harmful as desflurane. And we are in communication with the industry technology where we can actually retrieve some of these anesthetic agents from the exhale gases from the patient. This slide is just to show our costings with desflurane in 2021, and you can see if we bin desflurane, I think we have an easy win of about 8 grams of recurring savings every year, and that's quite significant. About nitrous oxide, we are following the same line as the nitrous oxide project. The first thing that we did was have a walkabout to find out where our manifolds are. Are they being serviced properly? Are there any leakages? Is there a log of the pressure gauges? And lastly, which areas are using more and which areas are dormant at the moment? And surprise, surprise, we also found an area which we never even imagined would be using nitrous, and that was endoscopy. It was being offered to patients having colonoscopies. So we also identified areas like our eye theatres where nitrous was not being used. We also got data from our cylinder changes with the BOC, and we are deciding to do the following things. So before that, I'm just going to tell you that nitrous and NOx both are very cheap gases per litre, but the amount that we use does then lead to quite a significant amount of spend over both these gases. And particularly as it is cheap and as it is a good analgesic for labor pain relief, I think it will be a mainstay for labor analgesia, but we'll have to smartly find things to work around it in terms of reducing environmental pollution. So we have decided to decommission the sites, particularly in eye theatres where it is not required. And we have also decided to replace our manifolds with cylinders on the anesthetic machine, which would help us to track how much nitrous we are using. We have still not done any piece of work in maternity with NOx. And of course, behavioral change with endoscopy. I don't think nitrous should be offered as a default pain relief for patient undergoing colonoscopy. And we are in communication with the gastroenterologist about this. Moving on to the next project that is going on simultaneously is waste management. We had a waste management policy about 10 years. The pandemic hasn't been kind in terms of the waste management. And at the moment, we are very poor in terms of compliance. So we've started a survey of at least the theatre staff to begin with, to find out what are the barriers. And one of the questions is, do you recycle your waste at home? Then what is the barrier for recycling at work? And we are going to collect and present this data in our governance meeting. We also had a walkabout to our waste management site in our hospital. We have a huge waste management site. We have energy from waste program running where we used the steam for heating our hospital. And we also have waste segregation for paper and cardboard. More importantly, what I found during this walkabout was the shredder that we use in office is not fit for purpose. So the shredded confidential document has to fit into certain spec of the strips that it shreds to. So we lease a big shredder 3 times a week, and that shredder handles all our confidential waste. But we are also on a drive to remove all the shop bought shredders in all nooks and corners in the offices that are lying about, because what is important to know here is if the shredded material is not fit for purpose, then it will be burned, and any paper or cardboard that is burned produces carbon in its weight, so it's not good for the environment. So step 1 is naturally to produce this data in the meeting. Step 2 is getting the right bins and awareness programs through posters and trolley training, and keeping an eye on whether we have compliance or not, and replicate in other areas. The other project that we want to undertake is PACS project. As you know, in theatres, we have lots of PACS and a lot of PACS which are wasteful. And we're going to start with, in our trust, we have lots of cannula packs. So we're going to start with the cannula packs, where we are going to strip it right down to what is needed, or we are going to bring about a change in practice where you can actually make your own pack before you go to the patient if you have to cannulate the patient. And this also needs to be replicated across the trust. Lucy has already mentioned this. We are going to look at over body heating, reducing single plastic with fluid warmers, and using 1 suction per patient. So right from when the patient is anesthetized to the patient is extubated, trying not to use more than one suction tubing. This is the data, as Heidi has mentioned as well. We have been using a lot of gas, oil, and purchased electricity for our sites. And I'll be really happy to disclose here that we've started work on our solar farms yesterday. We will be providing green energy for the whole trust by the end of 2022. What are the other projects that we plan to take? One is carbon footprinting for all clinical areas. We have hired Maloney and Associates to do that. Once we have that baseline data, then we are going to produce carbon crib sheets, which are already ready, and I'll be more than happy to share them if anyone is interested. This would be having targets for each specialty and even solutions, how they reduce their carbon footprint, and there'll be a compliance rating at the end, almost like a CQC walkabout. We plan to reduce carbon footprinting in travel and transport. In travel in particular, we are not reimbursing any domestic flights, particularly for business travels. And we are encouraging people to cycle to work. There is car sharing scheme. And about transport, we've signed up to the Green Fleet Review, where we are trying to understand the carbon footprinting of the current fleet that we have. But from April 2021, any vehicle that will be purchased would have low or ultra low emission. Talking about the plastic pledge in our catering, we are not having any plastic straws, stirrers, plastic cups, plastic cutlery, and all our kitchens are now free of polystyrene cups for drinks. COVID did one thing good to us, and that was digitalization. We've been using virtual clinics, we've been using meetings, attending meetings virtually, and smartly working from home, and we are going to continue to do that. We also have a sustainability digitalization program where we're going to expand our limits to outpatient clinic, where we can actually have one-stop clinic, a questionnaire-based clinic, for example, a pre-op clinic, by which we can reduce the care miles. So I think I'll end my presentation with some of the challenges that we have come across, and it is the one to begin with is, of course, engagement with the staff. And how do you get that buy-in into sustainability when there is so much agenda fatigue? We always have something new coming up and we expect people to engage with it. And I think the crux here is communication. We have comms lead on our team. There is constant focus on sustainability in our trust brief. Not only that, we have made sustainability as an agenda item in our departmental meetings, in our divisional meetings, so it is constantly at the forefront. I've also mentioned about the carbon crib sheets, which will come into action very soon after we have our footprinting. We encouraged our departments to give us volunteers who will be called as carbon champions, who will be driving all the projects in their own areas and celebrating and backing up projects that are happening in different areas. Since the recovery phase after pandemic, we've seen huge backlogs clinically, and clinical productivity is the priority at the moment. But I think that doesn't mean sustainability takes a back seat. You can always incorporate that into the clinical care pathway. I'll give you an example here, how you can use patient experience and quality outcomes to make sustainability as part of the care pathway. Our orthotics department has become completely green, and they have done that by making their patient appointments virtual, by reducing the packaging that they use, and sending the equipments through post. Now, this has reduced care miles by about 550,000. And you can imagine this sits very well with patient experience as well. So it's no longer a parallel agenda in running. Well, in this day and age, resources are scarce, they are stretched. and how do you make sustainability resources available? And first and foremost is it has to be made an everyday business and everyone's business. Also, like with our solar farms, we have tapped into external funding. You can do that. There are sustainability hubs available for technological know-hows. And I also sit on the regional meetings, and that helps with sharing the knowledge. And that one thing that I've found about sustainability is nobody is holding back in terms of their knowledge when it comes to sharing. And that's one good thing that has happened. And lastly, we have to address the elephant in the room, and the SDU, the Sustainability Development Unit, has said the maximum carbon footprint comes through the supply chains. And what we want from procurement is efficient use of resources. We want them to be innovative in terms of reducing their single-use plastic. And we also want them to look at decarbonizing their own procedures. And we have to look at our contracts. And this has to come from top-down leadership, and that's what's happening in our hospital. Also trying to focus by sourcing locally with collaborative partnership, increasing social value is very important to achieve sustainability in supply chains. I think that was my last slide, and I'm going to leave you with my colleague Janet Smith, who is head of sustainability, looks at the non-clinical side, and myself, my address and her address. And if anyone wants to get in touch with us, you're most welcome. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thanks, Mini. I mean, so many points there that I want to touch on. First of all, the knowledge sharing piece is exactly why we're here, so that we can get people like you to just be able to have a forum for discussion for knowledge sharing in general. The whole procurement piece, I mean, both yourself and Heidi particularly, it looks like, and Lucy touched on it as well, you know, you're not just taking those numbers for granted, that pie chart that you're sort of all given, oh, this is the information. You've gone and done your own research within your own trusts and said, actually, this is what happens in our trust. Here's a little bit more information, here's a little bit more insight, here's how we can make some change. And that whole leadership piece about procurement, where I feel like there's people on the front line who want to make that change, and then there's people like yourselves at the top who are saying, you know, let's try and make that change, and then you've got that procurement in the middle. And I just wonder, you know, how we can like put just a little bit more pressure, like you say, to change habits, to review contracts, to think a little bit outside of the box. And another huge reason why Sustainability Partnerships is here is so that we can introduce some super cool new technologies, new products, you know, sustainable things, and just get people out of old habits when it comes to procurement, and think there's so much more out there. And we don't want you to have to sit there for hours and hours like checking out the latest new technology, because we can potentially give you some access to the stuff that's out there. That's, you know, another reason that we're here. Now, I've literally got 5 minutes left, which is such a shame because we do have some great questions. There is one message asking if you guys want to share your contact details. Lucy, you've already shared your LinkedIn. Minu, you already shared your email address on the end of your PowerPoint there. I don't know how you're more than welcome to share your details or not. It feels like a lot of people are just really interested in getting in touch and maybe learn a little bit more from you guys. Particularly, we've got Amy here at Guy's in St Thomas, me and you, asking that she'd love to know a little bit more about how you implemented the plastics pledge, because again, it's that internal buy-in piece and that communication. If you could give us a bit more info on that.
That happened, Amy, through our sustainability group. So we have a monthly meeting where we have a representation from catering, and we just decided 2 months ago that we'll go plastic free with our not only patient and but also in staff kitchens, and it wasn't very difficult.
It's good to know. We've got Mary has asked a question for the panel, and I think specifically for you, Heidi. Thoughts and comments on reduction of energy use in the Alliance versus higher usage at home due to more home working. Just conscious we also need to be thinking about this. Any ideas how we can support staff?
So there's a few studies that have been done. One was done at Leeds, and I think there's one in one of the London-based trusts actually looking at, well, what is the carbon impact of working from home versus working in the office? And actually, it was really variable depending on other factors. But the trend, or the kind of the highlight coming out of it was in the winter, it was more carbon intensive to work from home, but in the summer was better, which you would makes complete sense, because people will have the heating on longer over the winter, potentially during the day, when they wouldn't necessarily if they're out at work. One of the interesting things is our energy consumption didn't drop because everybody's been working from home. And that is an interesting kind of insight into the efficiency of perhaps some of our buildings and when they're being heated or not. But I think there's a lot more we can do around the whole working from home piece and supporting staff through it. We have a work from home policy that got implemented as part of the pandemic and has not been lifted and is going to be here to stay. And we need to do much more to support people and put the process in place behind that policy. We did it as an emergency stopgap, but now we need to kind of reassess it and say, actually, to make this work sustainably, what support do people need? And the other thing, the flip side of that, is also changing the way we use space when people are in the office. So I take myself as an example, and many of the corporate services, as you can probably tell, I'm at home today. I don't need to be on site today. So I'm not, when I do need to be on site, I go in, but my need for the space while I'm there is different. So traditionally I would have had a desk and worked at my computer from a desk. But when I go on site, now I need to speak to people, I need to have meetings, I need to go and see what's going on. So actually what I need is access to spaces where I can meet people that is still COVID compliant. And that is a real mind-bending kind of piece of work we're having to do, to think about the change in how we use our spaces, and actually future-proofing it, because whilst a number of the kind of COVID policies we put in place will be relaxed, they won't all be relaxed. And there will be some things that we've implemented as part of the COVID response that will be here to stay, purely from an IPC perspective, because they're good practice, irrespective of what seasonal flus might be going around or anything else. I realised that was quite a waffly answer and didn't really answer the question, but essentially there's more work that needs to be done.
Yeah, there's not really an answer, is what you're trying to say. It's not, at least quick fix, I think, is the culmination of your point there. And it's something, again, when you were talking about sort of a forced digitalisation, that's actually made us all sort of rethink how we get on with things. But it's not just within the NHS. It's in every single industry where everyone's just been sort of forced into something that they weren't used to before. But it's been actually, we're not changing it now. It's been such a great move for a lot of people. There was a question from Dr. Addy in Hull. Is there a role for exemplary healthy hospital nutrition not associated with immunocompromising hyperglycemic spikes and not serving processed meals in health arenas? Again, you talked about particularly the catering and polystyrene and stuff like that, but I think it's more to do with the actual the food stuff. Does anyone have any points real quick on, I know we talked about in a few events before, like the carbon footprint of a lot of food and making sure that we're shopping local, but if anyone has any points on that, be happy to cover those.
So one of the things I'm really pushing for with our catering partners and suppliers is actually understanding the carbon footprint of a particular meal. So we have lots of alternatives. I've lost count of the number of different types of dietary requirement we cater for. But the concern I've got, particularly when I've started looking at the vegan meals, is you look at the list of ingredients in a non-vegan or traditional meal versus a vegan meal, the number of ingredients is ridiculous. And also the portion sizes are not the same. And if you think about a patient who's in hospital for a reason, most of the time they don't really particularly want to eat that much, and trying to force that much food down them to get the nutritional content in is difficult. So one of the things I'm pushing them for is to understand, well, actually, what is the carbon and the environmental impact of that meal, not just what the headline ingredient. So we talk a lot about meat, and obviously we all understand the impacts of that, but actually I need to understand, well, where is all that food and all of that stuff you're putting in this vegan meal to make it coming from? Is it a good alternative, or actually does it have its own issues? And the one example I gave, I was given something the day, and it had 3 counts of palm oil in it, which again, most of us will know is not great. And I'm like, so I'm swapping meat for palm oil. That doesn't feel like a great way to go.
Any of the other panelists have a point on any of the catering side?
I don't think we have explored into that yet.
I'm sure it's something that you guys will be looking at. A lot of people are having to say that they're having to go now. It's such a shame because there's so many other questions, so many other points. Heidi, I could talk to you for hours about retrofitting and the antiquated systems in some of the grey listed buildings in the NHS. We did do a construction webinar a couple of months ago, so more than welcome to go back and watch that back over. For everyone who still is here, we do have another webinar this afternoon. I'm going to put the link into the chat right now. This will be specifically for solution providers to come and talk about some of the points that we've covered this morning and some potential solutions that they've looked at. So please come along to that one if you do have the time. People have also asked about slides. We will ask our panelists if we can share their slides on our write-up. Our whole session today has been recorded. This will then go out onto the Sustainability Partnerships blog. It'll go out onto our social media. You'll be able to re-watch and then hopefully go back to all of the slides there as well. So I hope that everyone's enjoyed this as much as I have. It's such a shame that we have to leave after an hour and we couldn't get through some of the other points. So to everyone who came today, I really appreciate it. To our esteemed panel, and you know, I don't want to talk bad about the rest of the events that we've done, but honestly it's been so interesting, super intricate, and the fact that you've given up your time but also, you know, shared your real personal experiences is really appreciate that. So please share this once we have this live, and thank you so much to the panel and for everyone today.